a little bit to get through it. So please get comfortable. If you need to shift at all in your seat, don't worry about the noise that it'll make. I'm not easily distracted. It will be okay. All right, everyone comfortable? Our first reader is Adam Manfredi.
Thank you, everyone. I'm going to read one of the short stories from my collection and kind of read it until I get bored and then stop, because I'm hard to understand. Kumi woke to find a train surrounded by water. The only other passenger in the train car, an elderly couple working together on a crossword puzzle 2 seats down from her, seemed unconcerned with the view. That morning, Kumi had stood in front of her suite's bathroom door, pink towel in hand, as roommate Xiao screamed in Cantonese on the opposite side of the locked door. At least to Kumi, Xiao's phone calls to her family always sounded like screaming. She knew that wasn't fair, kind of racist, but it did sound that way. And Xiao locking herself in there was mostly Kumi's own fault. Earlier in the semester, while studying for her first Japanese test, which she ended up bombing, instead of throwing her kanji dictionary at Xiao and telling her to shut up, Kumi had nicely asked her to be a little more quiet while on the phone. But instead of lowering the volume of the conversation, Xiao just changed his location. It hadn't helped. Kumi now did most of her study deep in the silent stacks of the main library. "Xiao, I'm heading home for the weekend," she said to the locked door. The yelling went on for a minute before Xiao finally answered with a flat, "Okay. I'll be back Sunday," Kumi added. She waited for a reply, but the yelling started again, louder than before. Taylor and Christina's door on the opposite end of the suite was closed, and no one answered her knock. They must be out together. They were always out together. Photo covered their door, the two of them at football games, rush events, and themed sorority parties, always wearing matching clothing, always in a close embrace, always with the same identical smiles. She pictured herself photoshopped with images, but even in her imagination, she couldn't make that smile, seemingly naturally perfect and identical. Had they spent hours together in front of a mirror practicing it, or were they just born with it, genetic inheritance she had failed to receive? A small whiteboard hung from a peg on their door, but there didn't seem space for her to write, among the bubbly letters, multicolored underline, and excessive exclamation marks. Sitting on the train, surrounded by water, Kumi turned to the local section of a newspaper discarded on the seat next to her for explanation. After weeks of heavy rain, a levee that held the Sacramento Delta and Bay had failed, flooded the surrounding countryside, and filled in the basin that had once been Tulare Lake. The lake, at one time largest body of fresh water west of the Great Lakes, had been drained for farming on the teens, and now only reappeared once a half-century as a ghost of its former self. In the distance, from her vantage point on the second story of the train, Kumi could see rooftops and telephone poles poking out through the lake's dark surface. Its shores existed somewhere farther off, beyond the horizon, out of sight. The article mentioned a pilot who in 1939, during another year of heavy rains, came lost to the lake and crashed. Reading the article, Kumi imagined the panic and confusion that must have overcome the pilot, who, flying over familiar terrain, suddenly found himself surrounded by endless water. Even with this explanation, the scene unsettled her. She pulled the curtain across the window to hide the view. Kumi had tried to invite Xiao out to a few welcome week events, but after the fourth time Xiao turned her down, claiming crucial studying, urgent phone calls home, or important church meetings, Kumi stopped bothering to bother. The single time Xiao had invited her out, the party, as she called it, turned out to be a Bible study group.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, you guys have been there? Yeah.
That's for real, though.
Sitting on the cold metal chair of the florist's study room, Kumi had at first pretended to follow along in the study Bible Xiao had lent her, and nodded her way through all the God talk. But an hour in, the leader of the group asked Kumi what her personal relationship with Jesus meant to her, and she answered truthfully. "I don't have a personal relationship with Jesus," Kumi said, and then added, "Actually, I'm not really sure he ever existed." The 5 other girls in the study room stared at her in shock, as if she had just brushed back her straight, dark bangs to reveal a swastika tattooed on her forehead. Probably shouldn't have added that last part, she thought, as Xiao and the leader of their group talked in harsh, whispered Cantonese, while the other 3 girls pretended to have something pressing to read in their Bibles. She almost wanted to laugh. She'd been looking for an excuse to ditch the party, but it's one thing to leave, and another thing to be kicked out. "Maybe this wasn't such a good idea," Xiao finally whispered. A D&Z-like line divided their small dorm room. Kumi's side was a mess, with clothes, papers, and books strewn about, while Xiao's side was meticulously clean, bed neatly made, and books in precise alphabetical order. Every day, the line would move slightly back and forth, as each side lost or gained tiny areas of territory. On Kumi's side, above her bed, she taped a giant yellow and purple get well card. In the center of the card was a picture of her and Stacy at their junior high school Valley Championships, at their junior year's Valley Championships. They were still in the purple and yellow swimsuits, hair a mess from swim caps, gold medals hung around their neck, and smiles of triumph and exhaustion on their face. Kumi swam anchor on the 4x500 medley, and the team was over body length behind when Stacy, swimming the butterfly, touched the wall, and Kumi dove in. At the switch, she barely managed to cut the lead, but she tore through the last 25 and made the final stroke, lungs burning, tips of her fingers barely grazing the wall, the same instant as the girl she'd been chasing. The finish was so close, the judge had a conference before announcing the winner. The two friends waited poolside, Kumi gripping Stacy's hand so tightly, she later joked Kumi drew blood. Kumi was on the train headed home this weekend for the first time since moving to Berkeley to see Stacy. Being in the room with Xiao made Kumi feel like a house guest weeks beyond her welcome. Instead of her escape, most mornings, Kumi would retreat to the heated Olympic-sized pool at the campus recreation center, well before her 9 a.m. Japanese class, and sit in the bleachers half studying, half watching the graying professor swim languid laps. The familiar, sharp smell of chlorine and the rhythmic sounds of bodies moving through water, each second stroke coming up for a short breath, reminded her of a lifetime spent in pools. Just after 4, the train lurched to a halt at the Madera Amtrak station. It's at 10 minutes outside of town, flanked by a defunct poultry farm on one side and a field overgrown with brown weeds on the other. Little more than a long concrete slab, a single street light, a broken payphone, and a gravel parking lot, turning muddy with rain, labeled station, seemed to her excessive. As Kumi stepped off the train onto the rain-slicked platform, she slipped and awkwardly twisted her left knee. The large brace she wore stabilized her, but just from the feel of it, she knew it would be sore tomorrow. She kneeled, readjusted her brace as she stood up, and watched the train leave the station. She noticed she was the only person at the small station, and she checked her phone. The train had arrived on time. Where were they? She told them she was coming. Huddled underneath the overhang of the payphone to keep her cell phone dry, she called home, but no one picked up. She tried her mom's cell, but got an out-of-service message. She finally called her dad's work phone and got a voice message saying they were out of town for the weekend and a company retreat in the high Sierras. How could they forget she was coming? They had said they would pick her up. She went through her text to find proof of their fault, but instead saw it was her own. She'd gotten the date wrong, told them she was coming next weekend. She rested her head against the payphone's cold metal coin box and wondered what she was supposed to do now. Inside the phone booth, a faded yellow sticker advertising a local taxi service attracted her eye. As she waited in the rain for the taxi, she thought about texting Stacy. It had only been 2 days since she last contacted her. She knew she should wait. She didn't want to look desperate. During the first month of school, she texted Stacy constantly, complaints about her roommates, classes, grades, dorm room, the weather, and first Stacy had offered words of encouragement. But Kumi slowly noticed, at least she thought she noticed, a change in the responses. The replies took longer to come, and when they did, they were shorter, less sympathetic, and most telling, lacking the multitude of smiley faces that typically populated Stacy's communication. One night, after she texted Stacy at 2 a.m. about a particularly horrible day, Kumi got a text back. Calculus exam in the morning. Can't deal with another one of your crises at the moment. Want to try to do something about it instead of just complaining. Kumi sat on her dorm bed, shocked, unable to send a response. She went back through their texts, sure she had just only been complaining. But 20 minutes later, when the light from her phone woke Xiao and she summoned out of the room, Kumi still hadn't found one where she'd said anything positive. Stacy called next afternoon and apologized. School was stressing her out bad. But afterwards, Kumi limited her contact with a friend, and when she did, she began to lie about her life was improving. After enough time for her clothes to be soaked through with rain, the taxi finally arrived at the station, and Kumi hurried in. She'd only ever ridden in a taxi while on vacation with her family to large cities, San Francisco, Boston, D.C., and she sat in the backseat of this unfamiliar vehicle, watching through a rain-splattered window, the small town she'd been born in passed by. She couldn't help but feel like a tourist in a strange city. The house was cold and dark when she entered. Upstairs in her bedroom, she threw her bag down and turned the lights, with eager anticipation of flopping down into a queen-sized bed, so much larger and comfortable than her stiff dorm-room single. But she was greeted by an unfamiliar sight, a home office. She stepped back onto the hardwood floor of the hallway. For a moment, She felt as if she'd entered the wrong house. She stopped herself. It was silly. Of course it was her room, or at least it had been her room. It was just remodeled. She had told her parents before leaving Berkeley that it was okay if they turned her room into an office, but she didn't think they'd follow through with it so quickly without telling her. She looked at its freshly painted walls, forest screens that had the canary yellow they had been since she was in junior high school. She tried to picture exactly how it looked the day she left, but the image of the room she had lived in since she was 12 wouldn't come. The only thing remained from her old room was a large trophy case used to display her swimming awards and academic accolades. And this unfamiliar setting looked out of place. The awards seemed as if won by someone else, and Kumi wondered who that girl might be. So I'll stop there.